of the Facebook effect and founder of Techonomy Media, and the great-grandson of Henry Ford and our executive chairman of Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford.
Well, it's great to be up here. I've been reading tons of stuff that you've done and said in the last few days getting ready for this, and
you're still awake.
When I saw that you were a black belt in Taekwondo, I had to rethink some of my questions a little bit. But no, I was quite impressed. That's a fact. I didn't realize how really committed you have been to a set of ideas pretty much throughout your entire career. And it really, I was at Fortune for 25 years and I've written about so many big companies, and it's quite frequent that the visionaries get squeezed out. Now you had the name, I think that must have helped you, but how did you make so much of a change in the way this company operates? Your environmentalism, for example, is just striking.
Well, it was a long slog. And when I got out of college, I was an environmentalist, and this is 1979. And coming back to Detroit in the auto industry, to say those views weren't very popular would be a huge understatement. In fact, when I joined the board in '88, I was told to stop associating with any known or suspected environmentalists, and they meant it. That was crazy. I mean, they
like communists.
Well, no, they don't. Well, communists. They thought I was a Bolshevik. They thought I was and so it was hard, and it was really hard because I couldn't find anybody else in the company at a remotely high level who shared where I thought this company had to go. Because my great fear was not only was this the right thing to do, but I felt that if we didn't get on the right side of the issue, that the next generation would never come work for us. We wouldn't get the best and the brightest.
Wow.
And that we would end up being like the tobacco industry, where where our employees would have to apologize to their family and their friends for working there. I never wanted that to happen to us because I loved the Ford Motor Company, but I felt that for me to love the Ford Motor Company in the future would mean we had to completely reinvent ourselves. And and it took a lot of years, and it was a tough journey. I remember I spoke to the Greenpeace International Conference in 2000. I was the first industrialist ever to do that. And I don't know who was more freaked out about that, the people here in Dearborn or the people that I was speaking to at Greenpeace. But we've come a long, long way. And
breaks the stereotypes, yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the things that was interesting to me in those early days was there were some environmentalists who actually didn't want me to be green. Because I had one person say to me, "Don't you get it? If the enemy isn't the enemy anymore, how are we going to raise money?" And I thought, well, that's a fairly cynical view.
I don't think they really had a big problem with a lack of enemies, though.
No, but and most of them were great, but it was very tough in the early days to get any traction in our company, and there were many times where I thought about leaving, and I thought about, I'd come home at night and talk to my wife and say, I don't know why I'm doing this, because I feel like I'm not making any progress. I'm going to leave and go work for or start my own environmental foundation. And she said to me many times, you can go do that, and that's great, but don't you think you'd have a bigger impact if you could actually help change Ford? And so ultimately, that's why I stayed, and I love where we are today. But it's been over 30 years to get us here.
But you were saying that even when you were CEO, you were getting resistance to some of the things you wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The real seminal time for us was in 2006, and it was during the worst part of our history. I mean, we went through a near-death experience in 06, 07, 08. A couple of our competitors actually went through bankruptcy. We didn't, and but it was very tough for us too. And I interviewed Alan Mulally at my house that in 2006, and it was so refreshing to sit down with somebody who, within an hour, we were finishing each other's sentences. And right there, before he was even hired to come to Ford, we actually talked about doing two things that we thought would be very important. because we said, look, there's no point in going through all this horrific restructuring that we're going to have to go through if there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so we said, well, what would we like Ford to be? What would we really like Ford to stand for in the future? And we took two big bets, and they were big bets for us because they were very far from what Ford was at that time. We said we wanted to be known as the fuel economy leader, period, in every segment that we participated in. And we were anything but that. The second was that we wanted to be the technology leader. And actually, to deliver the first, we had to become the second. Because to be the fuel economy leader meant we had to deliver a lot of technology to our vehicles. And those were two very big bets, and it was interesting how quickly the two of us got to that point. And we set about doing it. Well, Alan had to get here first, and then we set about doing it. And I think the progress we've made has been startling, and it's really been fun, frankly.
Well, Ford really distinguished itself, and I think really did a lot for its brand when you did not take government money when everybody else did. That was very striking. I'm curious, if you look back on that, when you explain to yourself how Ford was able to do that, what's the best explanation?
Look, I can tell you that we went ahead and borrowed $23 billion when nobody else was borrowing money and before the credit window closed. I can tell you that it was the integration of our global organizations, all our disparate regional organizations into one global organization, and all that would be true. But I believe the biggest thing that got us through our employees. Our corporate culture is different than most any other company out there, and obviously you would expect me to say that, but what's really interesting is when people come to Ford from other companies, they say that. They say, well, this is like a big family. And it's not just my family, but we have a lot of second, third, fourth, and even fifth generation people working at Ford. And they simply wouldn't let us fail. I mean, I believe that's the biggest thing that got us through it. There were a lot of times, you got to remember, this is a time we're taking benefits away, we're laying people off, we're closing facilities, everybody's terrified about their job, and yet you'd walk down our corridors at 11 o'clock at night, and everybody would be there. That wasn't happening at other companies. And I think it's our people that pulled us through more than everything else that's been written about.
Well, going back to the environmentalism, you said that there was no support at the beginning when you got here. Then you started as a planner and you kind of moved through a number of jobs in Switzerland, etc. But do you think that along the way that sort of employee sort of enthusiasm might have been enhanced by, presumably a lot of employees kind of liked that kind of talk.
Yeah, it was an interesting, there was an interesting thing that was happening back then. The lower levels, i.e. the newer people in the company, loved what I was saying. But there was a group near the top that thought it was heresy. And so the message that I had really resonated with the troops. I just couldn't get the generals all fired up.
So yeah, right. You have this interesting case you've been making about mobility and trying to talk about cars in a much more holistic way. And honestly, I don't think there's anybody else in the industry who's doing it the way you have been, which I find extremely interesting. Can you just give us a summary of what you mean by that, this mobility future?
Yeah, I can. Okay, so I gave a TED Talk about a year and a half ago and outlining what I thought was a looming issue. Because I said everybody's focused on the environmental issues with the cars, and rightly so. But I believe in my lifetime we're going to solve that. It's either going to be through electric or hydrogen. We are going to make clean cars, and we're well on our way to having the technology to do that. But even as we're doing that, another issue is coming at us called global gridlock. We have 1 billion cars on the road today, and 7 billion people in the world. By mid-century, we're going to be at 9 billion people and about 4 billion cars on the road. Well, already today, you remember they had the 11-day traffic jam in China a couple years ago. That's the tip of the iceberg. And
a 100-mile traffic jam.
Yeah, and if you believe, as I do, that the purpose of any company is to make people's lives better, then we better get on with solving this global gridlock issue, because you already see in city centers, it's worse anywhere but, it's not great in LA, it's not great in New York, but it's great compared to places in South America and in Asia and even in Europe where traffic is just stultifying.
Yeah.
And people have to change their whole day around for when they leave. So, and I looked at it and say, at best, it will be an inconvenience, but it could become a human rights issue. If you can't move people and healthcare and food around urban areas, then this is no longer just a major inconvenience. So I believe that we need to attack this issue of personal mobility in a very different way than we've traditionally looked at transportation. And so what does that mean? Well, it means maybe new business models. You've already seen things like Zipcar come up. We have fractional ownership.
You did a big deal with, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. In fact, it was at Fortune's Brainstorming Green a few years ago that I met the CEO of Zipcar, and I thought he made so much sense that I sought him out afterwards.
Really?
Yeah. And I said, let's figure out a way to work together. And we announced a big deal earlier this year on college campuses. On every 235 college campuses, we will be providing Zipcar with their vehicles. And so, anyway,
So sharing, yeah.
yeah. So there's stuff like people like that. Well, I like it. It's very cool. But so there are new business models like that will spring up. There's lots of new technology, some of which has been invented, a lot of which needs to be invented. Vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. So in the world that I think has to happen, if you think of a major city, you think of the transportation assets, the subways, the bicycles, the pedestrians, the buses, the private cars, the cabs. They're all going to have to be integrated into one network. And if we do that, I think we can provide the individual mobility that people would like.
Does that mean that Ford maybe gets into some completely different businesses? I mean, if you're integrating buses and bicycles and cars, you're not just a car company. What are you going to be?
Well, I'm not sure we'll be the integrator. We might be, but I'm not sure we're the most natural integrator. But we will work with companies that will do that. I mean, because it's not just, if you think of it, it's not just autos and not just tech. It's things like urban planners. That's going to have to be a big part of this. Policymakers. If you think about autonomous driving and then sensor collection, I mean, there's going to have to be privacy issues that are going to go along with cloud computing coming into your vehicles. We're going to really need to think through this whole notion of mobility that's going to bring in a lot of non-traditional. For an automotive company, these are all non-traditional, and yet I'm really excited by it because I think it's if we and when I say we, I don't mean just Ford, but we as a society can pull this off, we're going to really make people's lives more enjoyable and freer in the next 50 years. Because if I look at what my great-grandfather did, this is really kind of what he did. He had a saying, "Opening the highways to all mankind." Is what he felt he did. He took
It sounds like Mark Zuckerberg, by the way.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm not joking.
No, I know it does, and the parallels are striking. And if you think what Henry Ford did, he didn't invent the car, but he made it available to everybody. And so we at Ford, we use the term democratization of technology. And that's what I think we should be doing.
I love that term.
As we go forward. And it drives everything we do. So when we put, Sync, which is our mobile platform, we didn't put it on our most expensive cars to start. We put it on our least expensive cars to start. And why? Because, again, we want to democratize it, get it out to lots of people. And so, and I think of this whole urban mobility topic really along these very same lines. It's kind of like a reinterpretation of my great-grandfather's opening the highways to all mankind. And in some ways, this is keeping the highways open to all mankind. But instead of the highways, it's really going to be mostly the urban areas.
But Ford, so are you saying that Ford still will probably be viewed as some version of a car company in 10, 15 years?
Well, it depends on your time frame. I suspect we'll always be making cars and trucks. We may be doing something else very different as well. I mean, if we think of ourselves as a mobility company rather than just an automobile provider, that really opens up lots of different possibilities. And I think, we need to have that kind of intellectual flexibility as we think about the future.
It's interesting, it just occurred to me, the diametrical opposite mindset is what happened after World War II, when another major company was deeply involved in removing railroads and streetcars from certain American cities as a way of promoting the use of cars.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the thing. We can't be antagonistic toward any other form of transportation. In fact, we have to embrace it and try and enhance it. Because if our true purpose is to serve people, then we need to figure out how we can best do that, and it can't be by fighting other parts of transportation. It has to be by integrating with them. And so, I mean, you know, if you think of the traditional model, you talk about post-World War II, it was shoving 2 cars in every garage. Well, try that in Mumbai, you know, or a lot of the developing cities around the world. People don't have garages, and if they did, they're paying a fortune for it, and you're sure not going to shove 2 cars in it. So, so, you know, the whole mobility model is going to be very, very different as we go forward.
Your guy, Venkatesh Prasad, is somebody who I know fairly well, and I love his line. He said, in India, your car is the best room in your house.
Yeah. Well, it really, you know, if you think about all the technology we're loading in here, it's sort of becoming that here too. I mean, it's, you know, but what's going to change though is today, you know, you've got 1 billion cars on the road, and they have a lot of computing power in them. But they're single entities, they're not connected. So what we really need to do is to take these 1 billion computers and connect them with each other and with the world around them. And if we do that, it's going to really make life a whole lot more pleasant for people to own a car, to drive a car. And really, you know, a lot of the technology we're putting in there now is not, I mean, people think about technology and think about electrification, and we're pushing hard on that. But we're also bringing a lot of infotainment into cars, a lot of safety technology into cars, all of which requires connectivity.
Well, I wrote an article for Forbes about how you were the first company to really work with Facebook to do a big corporation to come in and actually build Facebook apps for cars.
Yeah.
Which is kind of revolutionary. And I, as somebody, you know, my thing I'm doing now, Techonomy, is all based on the premise that technology is a transformative tool for everything, and there's all kinds of promise if we really embrace it, which is why I love the way you're thinking about it, and particularly taking it beyond just, you know, fuel ignition and systems, etc., but the systems that we have to employ integrating all this stuff, and software, a software-centric view. And with Ford Sync, you're way ahead having a platform like that.
Yeah, we've got over 4 million vehicles with Sync on the road today, and what's cool is we made it an open platform, so developers are developing apps against Sync, and we love that. That's why we did it. So, yeah, our world is changing, and you think about technology. Part of this green journey I've been on, it was frustrating because there wasn't a whole lot you could do about it in the early days. I mean, you could have a 4-cylinder engine that was, you know, couldn't get you up a hill, and if you wanted to be green, you had to have, you know, trade-off air conditioning and power windows and, you know, any kind of fun to drive. But now technology can deliver it all into the engine, and, you know, things like, well, this is my vehicle here. This is serial number 1 of our electric Focus, and one of the benefits of my job is I get to order serial number 1. But and so this is it. And I can't.
It's a nice looking.
It's a blast to drive. It's a blast to drive, and that's what I think people, when they get in these vehicles, are really going to find. And that when you drive electric vehicles, you're not giving up anything. Yeah, you've got some range anxiety, which is ultimately why plug-ins, at least initially, may have more universal appeal. But pure, I mean, this is pure electric, and it is really, really fun to drive. And you never thought you'd say that about a new technology.
One of the things that I worry about a little is, particularly in the developed economies, that the kind of thinking you represent may be a little bit ahead of consumers, especially in a moment we're in right now where oil prices are plummeting. And I've read 2 articles this week that predict that oil prices could go as low as $40 a barrel, and you've said a lot that high oil prices is one of the things that make you confident that this is the right direction. So how are you thinking about that and the consumer reaction if oil prices go down?
See, I don't believe for a minute that we're going to live in a world of permanently lower oil prices. I mean, we may, because of economic slowdown around the world, temporarily see lower oil prices. But, you know, oil is, you know, it's tough to find, it's expensive to find, it's in geopolitically, you know, difficult parts of the world. And I believe that, you know, any kind of trend line is still going up. I mean, and there will always be these things, but but what's interesting is we believe that our technology, because we actually are making our gasoline engines, we have a technology called EcoBoost, which we're very proud of, that delivers great fuel economy at a price that's very affordable to customers, and that they love. And it basically gets you the performance of a 6-cylinder with the fuel economy of a 4.
You can put this in any car.
Yeah, what's really cool is we did it in our big F series, and we did that holding our breath because those are V8 customers, through and through, and we were really worried that the F series truck customer would not buy a 6-cylinder truck, which got much better fuel economy. And you know what? They're buying them in droves, and it's been hugely successful because it has all the torque and the power that they got out of their 8-cylinder, but it gives them by far best in class fuel economy. And so, because you think of it, most people who have a truck use it to work either all the time or at least part of the time, and therefore fuel is a cost to them. It's the cost of doing their business. So if we could prove to them that they could do their business and get better fuel economy but not give up anything like payload, they would like it, and it's been true.
Sort of like the unbelievable acceleration you get from a hybrid. I mean,
yeah,
it's really amazing. You get one of those, it's like, whoa, that's the best off the stop light I ever did.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's a hybrid, a pure electric, or plug-in, they really are fun to drive.
You're on eBay's board, which I find fascinating, being a guy who spent most of my career covering tech. What have you learned doing that has affected the way you think about running this company?
Wow. Well, let me just say why I went on the board. So I approached my board here. I said I wanted to go on a board. This is about 7-8 years ago. And they said, great. And I think they thought I was going to pick a big industrial company. I said, well, I've narrowed it down to Starbucks and eBay. And they looked at me like I was out of my mind. And they said, why?
Yeah, go to U.S. Steel. That's a great company to be.
Well, I think they were thinking more traditional. But I said, look, Starbucks to me is interesting because it's taken the ultimate commodity item, something you used to buy for 25 cents at the gas station, and people were standing in line to pay $3 for it. And yet we were going the other way. We were taking the ultimate personal item and discounting them like commodities. So I thought, well, that's interesting. They've completely turned it around. eBay to me was really interesting because the whole notion of borderless commerce I thought was fascinating. I mean, if you were a customer on eBay, you didn't know or care if you were buying a shoe from somebody in Lansing, Michigan, or from Bangladesh. Didn't matter. And furthermore, you trusted that person to deliver you that to me was a fascinating way to do business and something we'd never seen. So anyway, I ultimately went on the eBay board, and I've learned a ton. First of all, because they own PayPal, and they own StubHub, and they own a lot of other really interesting entities. But I've learned how fast they move. I mean, you and I were talking
faster these days, by the way.
Well, you and I were talking earlier about PayPal and how fast PayPal's moving, and how fast PayPal's going on the mobile platform, and eBay's actually moving very fast on the mobile platform too. And it's really been interesting to see how quickly they move, how in touch they are with their customer, and the whole Silicon Valley ethos is something to me is really interesting. So whenever I go out there, I don't just go to eBay. I always spend a couple extra days poking around the valley, I love it because now there's a danger in that. At times, Silicon Valley is every bit as insular as Detroit, Michigan.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they start to drink their own Kool-Aid just as we drink our own Kool-Aid here sometimes. But overall, I think it's a fascinating place with brilliant people who don't have any sense of limitation. And I really like that. And to me, it's been really inspiring. And I've had a blast being on the eBay board, and I've had a blast going to the Valley. We just opened our own Silicon Valley office a couple weeks ago. I was so excited. I went out before it opened and met the first employee. I couldn't wait till it opened. And I showed up and knocked on the door, and this poor young guy that we just hired from Stanford, I think, thought he didn't know what to expect. But it was it's very cool, and I'm very excited about that because it'll do two things. One, it'll allow us, Ford, to have a laboratory where we can, try out apps and everything else. But I think there are two other things. One is we'll have a much better feel about what's going on in the valley. But I think equally importantly, maybe more importantly, it gives all the really smart entrepreneurs out there a place to go to interact with Ford. Because if you're in Silicon Valley, how do you get to Dearborn? And who do you talk to? Who's going to take your call? So it really gives them an entry point into our company, and I think that's important.
I think that's really smart. Who has a question or a comment from out there? You're a bunch of journalists, you should have things to say. There's mics, okay, back there. Can you just identify yourself when you speak up?
Good afternoon, good evening, thanks for having us. My name is Eric Goldmark. I have a site called EnviroDad.com, and I do write a lot of environmental auto journalism. My question to you, Bill, and congratulations on your way of thinking. But what does sustainability mean to you? From an automotive perspective, but just from an overall perspective of society, how you fit in that role. I'd be curious to know about how you view sustainability.
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because if you ask everybody out there what their definition of sustainability is, you'll get something a little bit different. But I look at it this way. I mean, clearly we're trying to make our vehicles, well, I should take a step back. Years ago, I sat with Bill McDonough, who many of you know is has been a leading thinker. He was the dean of the School of Architecture at University of Virginia. And he came to see me a bunch of years ago and asked me, and I found him quite interesting, but he said, what can we work on together? And I pointed out the window and I said, how about the world's largest brownfield site, the Detroit Rouge, which at one point employed 100,000 people.
Brownfield, what does brownfield mean exactly?
It was filthy, put it that way.
It was to be cleaned up. Okay.
Well, it was a site that had produced everything for a vehicle, because my great-grandfather's vision was to have a vertically integrated company.
You mean the rubber plantations and everything? But
yeah, and we brought iron ore by freighters, and we turned it into steel at the Rouge, and then we fashioned the steel at the Rouge into parts, and parts into vehicles, and it was all self-contained. But there was a century of building all that stuff, making steel, before we knew what the impact of all that would be. So Bill kind of gulped, and we were talking about cradle-to-cradle concepts. And so we went to work, and what's very cool is our employees loved the idea, and ultimately what came to pass is the world's most environmentally progressive assembly plant, and 95% of the ideas came from our employees, which is what Bill hoped would happen. But initially, we had a
grass on the roof. Was that an employee idea?
No, that was actually one of Bill's. That was Bill's. But you can imagine, here was this bow-tied professor sitting with about a group of 35-year veterans of Ford engineering and manufacturing. They're sitting there like this, when Bill starts in on his concept. By the time he finished, they're all nodding their heads, and within 6 months, they're all writing ideas and posting them on the wall, which ultimately came to pass. And we've got very cool things like we turn our paint fumes into fuel, which powers a fuel cell. We have low-tech things like permeable pavement. We put a phytoremediation field in, so all our wastewater is sent through swales of plants, and what comes out the other end is drinking quality water. So and lots and lots and lots of different things. We did things to humanize the space, like putting skylights in, and but that's a whole nother story, and I'm not directly answering his question, which is what is sustainability. So sustainability to me is making our vehicles clean. It's making our vehicles recyclable. 85% of our vehicles today are recyclable, where we're shooting for 100%. It's, in the last 10 years, and this doesn't get any airtime, but it was important to us, we've cut our energy usage, our CO2 emissions, and our water usage, all by roughly 50%. And we were, I think, the first industrial company, certainly the first automotive company, to even care about water usage and start to measure it. And so when I think of a sustainable company, it's a company that really works hard to be environmentally correct and progressive and lead on environmental issues. But it's also gets right into what we were talking about a second ago. It's about how do we sustain ourselves within society in a way that, again, can make society a better place to live. So it's a pretty broad definition in my book of what sustainability is, and it kind of captures all what I think is important about where this company needs to go.
Okay, maybe way in the back? Yeah.
Hi, Michael Oliveira with the Canadian Press. Bill, I'm curious to hear how you view Apple as a competitor for your sync technology and the looming battle for car technologies in general.
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I view it as a looming battle. I mean, we've worked with Apple a lot in developing Sync. I mean, we had to make their iPhones compatible with our Sync technology. It's a great company, and we don't want to be in battle with anybody. And we
Actually, the most profitable company in the world.
Well, it's a great company, but we've spent a lot of time developing the Sync platform that we're very proud of. And I think what I feel is important for us is, our Sync platform is device agnostic, and you can use any device and it'll work with Sync. The Apple, at least early days, what I'm hearing is it's for the Apple technology. And so, I think the road we're going down makes a lot of sense. But, would I want to work with Apple in the future? Of course. I think this is overblown. It's early days. We've been at this a long time with Sync. And as I said, I like what we're doing. I like the fact that we're device agnostic. But it certainly doesn't mean we wouldn't work with Apple.
Yeah, think about Amazon too, by the way. Who else? Over there.
Anna Hackman from Retalk. I'm really fascinated by your 30-year struggle, and I think that's a lot of lessons that can be learned from it. So what kind of advice would you give, like medium or small businesses that are just starting out, struggling with sustainability, like how to get the general aboard?
Well, I'm not very good at advice because I think everybody kind of faces their own issues and they're all different. But I would say this: don't give up. I mean, it's if you have a vision and you really believe in it, it's easier for me to say because I did have the protection of my last name at Ford. So it was easier for me to sort of, I didn't get canned, which could have easily happened, I suppose, along the way. But I would say this, I think society is demanding more and more of that anyway. It's a lot easier today to be green and progressive, and thankfully so, because customers are demanding it too. I mean, for a long time, the great dichotomy that was true in the early days was, if you asked a customer out there, are you interested in being a green customer? Virtually all of them would say yes. But then you would start to ask them, well, what are you willing to give up for that? Are you willing to give up comfort? Well, no, not really. Are you willing to give up performance? No, I prefer not to. Are you willing to give up features in your vehicle? No, I don't think so. And are you willing to pay more for it? Well, not if I've got to give up all that other stuff. And so, it was a tough equation early on to present customers with a really viable green product. But it's technology, frankly, that has allowed us to do that. And I think technology is now allowing customers to demand that of small companies, medium companies, and big companies. So I'm really not very good at advice, just because I wouldn't want everyone to do what I did, because I think it might not work out so well.
Actually, it's big companies more than little ones that even need to hear it, because a lot of them are clueless. How about up in the front, right here? This guy, do we have a mic for this guy?
Hi, Chris Murphy with Information Week. I know we have a lot of policies and privacy issues and to work through with the kind of infrastructure and car-to-infrastructure communication. But what technology leaps do we need? Where are the technology shortcomings today that prevent that happening?
That's a good question.
Well, a lot of it is data collection. I mean, there are a lot of sensors out there. Cars are rolling sensors, but a lot of it there's a lot of uncollected and uncollated data that's out in the ether that needs to get collected and distributed in a real-time basis so that it's useful. So that's something that I don't know if it needs to be invented. I know there are companies that can do that. but that we're going to need more of that as we go forward. I think vehicle to infrastructure communications is something that's going to have to get better. But you know, a lot of it is developing the technology. I'm not sure what really needs to be invented because, you know, even autonomous driving is you know, is technically possible today, but it's certainly, we need a lot of refinement as we go forward on all these technologies. So I'm not really sure what invention needs, but boy, do we need a lot of development and refinement of technology. You know, if you think about vehicle to infrastructure, you know, it can be as easy as you're coming home at midnight and there's no other traffic on the road. Why should you have to stop for a red light? That red light should sense that you're coming, you know, since there's no other traffic coming, turn the red to green and allow you not to burn fuel and waste time sitting. That's at an easy level, you know. But what about at a...
Nothing more frustrating than standing at the light when there's no cars at midnight.
You shouldn't have to do that. But now think about it on a bigger level. What if, you know, most major cities have 4 lanes of traffic coming in the morning and 4 lanes going out, except in the morning it's jammed and the outbound lanes are empty. And so what if you could sense that and all of a sudden switch from 4 and 4 to 6 and 2 in the morning, and switch it to 6 and 2 on outbound.
New York does that. You know, we have these weird cement barriers that they move over.
Exactly. But what if you didn't have to, you know, to physically do it? And you know, and so there's a lot of stuff that's possible out there but it's going to require development. It's going to require prove out, and it's going to require a lot of entities working together in a way that they haven't.
Okay, here. Oh, Mike's not on here.
Hi, I'm Allison Blackman of the Advice Sisters, and I'm wondering, Bill, first of all, thank you for being so green and for all these initiatives, but what percentage of a Ford car is recyclable?
85.
Thank you.
Well, that was an easy one. Okay,
Going to 100. But importantly also, we use a lot of recyclable material in the cars, in the seats, and we use a lot of plant-based products now in our vehicles as well. So that's actually a cool new frontier that we're having a lot of fun with. But you know, just to show there's no new ideas, my great-grandfather felt that soybeans could save the world, and he built an entire car out of soybeans. And there was a famous photo of him with a sledgehammer hitting a soybean bumper to prove to skeptics that soy really could stand up to it. He never got to see his dream out, but you know, even then he was experimenting with renewable products to go into his vehicles, and somehow we got away from that.
that's interesting. Okay, back here.
Hi, Diane McCaffrey with Big Green Purse. The natural disasters that are occurring, certainly in this country and around the world, are completely changing the landscape of so many communities, including their transportation patterns, which seems to me to create a real opportunity to implement some of the transportation ideas that you might have. And so I'm wondering, to what degree is Ford working with some of these communities as they rebuild to rethink smart transportation grids?
A lot of them, you know, it's interesting. You know, a lot of them, it's low on their totem pole of things to get done as they rebuild their communities. One of the things that I think is really interesting, though, is what's happening in the city of Masdar, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's in Abu Dhabi, and it's a city that's being built from scratch in the desert. And the notion behind it was it was going to be, it is to be the greenest city in the world, and they're using a lot of incredibly interesting concepts. One of which is the transportation concept, which is above ground, all pedestrian walkways. But then you get into these stations and you get into these pods, and you program where you want to go, and it zips you around. Unlike public transport today, subways, which moves you in a linear fashion, these pods can move you in a messy, for lack of a better term, fashion, and then pop you up where you want to go. It's very cool. I mean, I haven't seen it. I've seen demos. I haven't been to Masdar. I'd like to. One of our executives went a few months ago and came back and said it's well worth seeing, and I'm going to do it. But so that's very cool, but the problem is it's easier to do when you start from scratch, a little harder to do when you try and retrofit existing communities. But those are the kind of concepts that we will be exploring, you know, as we go forward.
Unfortunately, we've got to wrap. I just wanted to make one comment before we do, which is that I'm very excited because Techonomy Media, which is my little company, this technology focus, is tomorrow going to announce Techonomy Detroit, which is a one-day conference on September 12th focused on how technology can play a role in U.S. competitiveness, jobs, and urban revival, and we're doing it in Detroit very deliberately, and we're excited because the Detroit Economic Club, which you're the chair of, is our partner in doing that, so that's exciting.
That's going to be very cool, and thank you for coming to Detroit.
Thanks for your support on that, and it's really been so great to sit up here talking with you. I think we could go a lot longer. I have tons more, but you really do speak differently than your average corporate leader, even still, and I think a lot of people here realize that.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for all you're doing. I think it's really cool what you're up to, and you are helping us truly change the way we live, and I think that's awesome. And, one last thing, you may wonder why we're here at this stadium. Well, in my other life, I'm Detroit Lions. I'm the vice chair of the Detroit Lions. My dad and I own the team, and with my family, and so we built this stadium. And what's very cool is when we built this, it has a lot of recycled material in it. We used it, and most stadiums at the time didn't, I mean, none of them used it. A few of the newer ones are starting to, but it's a blast. And when you get a chance to go around here and try and kick field goals, take a look around. Because one of the things we did, this was an old warehouse. Detroit had an old department store called Hudson's. Some of you who are older may remember that name. And this was the old Hudson's warehouse. And the original architecture idea was that this would be a standalone entity in the middle of Detroit. And I said, no, every dome stadium I've ever been in around the country is sterile, cold, and you don't even know what city you're in. So I kept saying to the architects, I want somebody to be able to walk into a stadium, rip the blindfold off, and know exactly that they're in Detroit and the home of the Detroit Lions. So anyway, the architects came up with this idea, which I thought was really cool, is actually making the warehouse part of the stadium. And so you see the old brick, and actually, where you guys had cocktails, that's a brick street called Adams Street, and we just decided to run Adams Street right through the stadium. Because in the old days, Adams Street had bars and restaurants, and so we set it up so that Adams Street comes right through with its brick paving and then goes right on out. It's been a great stadium. And the other thing, I want a natural light in here because most stadiums I've been in that are domed are just dark and all artificial light, and I hate it. So it's all translucent lighting around the field there, and then obviously we've got this great atrium. But we've had the Super Bowl here. Unfortunately, the Lions weren't in it. Someday. We've had the NCAA Final Four, and we had the NCAA Frozen Four, which is the hockey tournament, which was a blast. It's the first time we put a hockey rink in the middle there, and they've never done it in a stadium this big, and it was very, very neat. So anyway, I just want to officially welcome you all to Ford Field as well as to Ford Motor Company. And thank you all for coming. This has been a blast.
Your passion for that as well as your main job is very obvious, so thanks so much for that.
Thanks, David. Thanks a lot. Thanks.